Good morning. Welcome to the Humanist Community in Silicon Valley Sunday Forum. My name is Ray Sunby, president of the Humanist Community. Humanist Community is a chapter of the American Humanist Association. Humanism is a reality-based philosophy of life that affirms our ability and responsibility to lead ethical lives of personal fulfillment that aspire to the greater good. We value freedom, health, happiness, fairness, compassion, and using science and reason to acquire and apply knowledge. If these words describe your thinking, we invite you to become a member of the Humanist Community and contribute to advancing the humanist movement in our local area. If you have not yet joined or renewed your membership for the current year, please consider doing so. Obviously, we need and appreciate your financial contributions to keep the Humanist Community going. If you can contribute without putting yourself or your loved ones in financial difficulty, please do so. You can donate online by going to humanists.org. Click on the longest of the links at the top of the page. And now we'll have Judith from the ACSJ talk to us.
I'm Judy Bannister. I'm representing the atheist community of San Jose, and the atheist community and the humanist community are very pleased to co-host this fabulous event today with our wonderful speaker, Brad Onishi. Brad is famous or infamous for his podcast that's called Straight White American Jesus, correct? And we're going to learn more about this very well-known podcast during Brad's talk. I'm going to let Brad tell you about his life story, so I don't need to tell you that. It's a very interesting life story.
As I was introduced, my name is Dr. Bradley Onishi. I teach up at the University of San Francisco, and I want to talk today about something that I think many of you in the room are familiar with and are kind of already kind of worried about, but I'm not. I'm sure I'm going to do my job today and show you that it's much worse than you probably think. So in addition, though, I want to talk about some solutions and some strategies for combating Christian nationalism. I speak, as Judy and some others hinted at, I speak as a former insider to white Christian nationalism. I'm a biracial person. My dad's Japanese American from Maui. My mom's a white woman from Tennessee. They met in the middle in California, and I grew up in a non-religious household. And yet at age 14, I was getting in trouble a lot, suspended from school, drug, sex, rock and roll, the whole thing. And I had a girlfriend invite me to church, and I'd never been a church person, but I thought this is perfect. It's Wednesday, I'm 14. The only way I'm going to see my girlfriend tonight is at church, because I'm going to tell my mom we're going there to get straight with God, and we're going to, quit getting in trouble. And then I'm going to sneak away and find my girlfriend, and we're going to go make out, and it's a perfect plan. Well, when I got there, I was dressed like a 1990s grunge person, like Kurt Cobain or something. You all remember those days. And I thought they were going to reject me, and they didn't. They did a good job at that church. It was a megachurch down in Orange County where I grew up. And they said, come on in. And there was cool young leaders, and they had tattoos and guitars, and I was hooked. And I found two things there that I want to come back to. And that is, I found community right away, and I found answers to all my existential questions. I was a kid who, I'm a professor now, so it kind of foreshadowed my life as somebody who kind of thinks for a living and reads books for a living. But I thought a lot about the meaning of life when I was a teenager, and church was really good at answering those questions. I was a minister by 18. I was married and a full-time minister by 20. And I was entering seminary the month after I finished college at a Christian school down in LA. By the time I got to 23, again, professor, voracious reader, I had read my way away from that fundamentalism I'd converted to. I was a hardcore fundamentalist Christian. When my mom asked me when I was 16, what do I want for Christmas? I said, Mom, send Bibles to people who have never heard about Jesus. And she looked at me like, really? And I said, yeah. And here's the pamphlets. If you're going to spend $30 on my Christmas gift, that could get us 100 Bibles for people in Nepal or in Thailand or in Iran. And she looked at me and thought, she didn't say it, but her eyes said, I really wish you'd go back to being a normal teenager, like smoke some pot, sneak out of the house. And this is a little too much now, right? So I was that kind of Christian. And if you want more of those stories, I have hundreds of them. There's a bunch in this book right here. When I found my way out of that, what I dismantled was not only a religious belief that fell apart, that to me no longer held. The center was no longer viable. What stood out to me was I dismantled so many other things. And what I dismantled, and that's what I want to talk about today, was not only a myth of a certain kind of Christ or a certain kind of religion, but a myth of the United States. Because what I learned implicitly and explicitly at that church and in my ministry and all that 11 years I was part of the movement was that this was a Christian nation founded on Christian principles. And that meant certain things for what it meant to be a real American, for what it meant to be a real citizen, for what it meant to be a good patriot, for what it meant to be somebody who lived a virtuous life in the public square. Okay. Well, unfortunately, we've only seen that rhetoric ramp up over the last 15 years since I left the church. And I want to talk about that today. I've gone from somebody, just to kind of finish the story, I went away to Oxford University. I studied, and I went from somebody who was there to be a kind of minister or theologian to somebody who studies religion from the outside. So I identify as a secular person. I'm no longer part of a religious community. And yet I have studied these things for the last 2 decades, philosophically, sociologically, and so on. And on my podcast, as Judy mentioned, we do that 3 times a week. I talk to authors, I talk to scholars, I talk to journalists, and we basically dissect these issues from every angle possible. So that's kind of my life now. That's who I am. That's what I do. So let me talk about white Christian nationalism and what that looks like from my view. Go ahead and share my screen. I apologize here, everybody who's online. Let me do that quickly, and then we'll get moving. All right, there we go. Let's go back to the beginning, shall we? Okay. So I want to talk today about white Christian nationalism and the threat to American democracy. That's interesting. On my screen, we're at the beginning, and up there, we're not. Huh. Fascinating. Oh, there we go. Now we're doing it. We're just behind. Okay. Again, I think some of you know all about this, and I'm going to be quick on the basics, and then I want to talk about our new Speaker of the House. You all hear about this? We have a new Speaker of the House? Yeah, I know you have. This is a really educated group who pays attention. So I'm going to tell you right now, our new Speaker is a lot worse than you think. And I know some of you are like, really? That doesn't seem possible. All right. So yeah, we're moving really slow. So we're going to try to catch up here. Here we go. All right. We'll get to the right slide here in a sec. All right. So what is Christian nationalism? I want to just give you 3 ideas. Christian nationalism is a cultural identity. It's an idea that this is a Christian nation, and that if you're going to be a real American, you need to be a Christian. And as a Christian, you are the real American. And this can take many forms. This can take the form of, hey, I attend church on Sunday. I really enjoy the fact that there's in God we trust and one nation under God in our money and our pledge. And I won't really vote for anyone unless they're a Christian person. That's Christian nationalism. I think that's pretty hurtful, but it's one end of the spectrum. The other end of the spectrum is, as I'll get to later today, we have about 9% of people in the country who think you should only be able to be a citizen legally if you are a Christian. That's kind of the other extreme, right? Okay. So we have these 3 components that I want to highlight today. One is the myth of the Christian nation, which I just talked about. That includes a nostalgia for past glory. It also includes an apocalyptic view of the future. Okay. And I'm going to go fairly quick through this part just because I do want to get to our new speaker. Okay. In ideological terms, Christian nationalists believe that the country is built for and by Christians. And they see themselves as central to the narrative of the United States. And I want to highlight this. They tell a story. And as we get into the second part of today, asking questions, throwing around ideas about how to combat Christian nationalism in our public square, I want to just highlight the idea of narrative. Because religion, for all of the things that I know all of you are thinking in your head right now, I know this group, I know what you're thinking right now, okay? What religion does really well, unfortunately, is tell stories. And it gives people roles to play. And that's something that if we don't take that seriously, we're going to have a hard time ever combating it in our public square in our elections, in our elected officials. So I think that's something we should take seriously, okay? Now, they want an America first approach to policy and trade because the United States is supposedly chosen by God as a city on a hill. Now, the last part is something I want to highlight, and it sometimes surprises people. To be a Christian nationalist, you don't actually have to get up every Sunday and go to church. You don't have to read the Bible every day, pray, etc. Why is that? Because it's a cultural identity in which you're telling a story about yourself and the United States. You all have a lot of humanist friends, don't you? They're not here today, right? They're probably on a hike, all right? Some of them are surfing, some of them are still in bed. Who knows what they're doing, right? Watching football, right? But they're still humanists, aren't they? They're still atheists, okay? There's a lot of Christian nationalists that haven't been to church in years, haven't read the Bible, right, in a long time. But you ask them about this country and they say it's a Christian nation, founded by Christian people with Christian principles. We need to restore this country to God's glory. And you're thinking, well, hey, Jerry, yeah, you haven't been to church in 5 years. What are you talking about? And what they're doing is they're telling you a story about who they think they are and what this country is, rather than something about the 3 times a week they attend Bible study and the 10 times a week they pray and the 15 times a week they actually read the Bible. And I think we need to take that seriously. Okay, so let's talk about this a little bit further. So Christian nationalists share the conviction, slide's going to show up here in just 1 second, I promise, that the country's declined over time due to the growing prominence of outside invaders and ungodly forces. Sam Perry and Andrew Whitehead, my colleagues, argue that Christian nationalists view the United States as similar to Israel in the Hebrew Bible. And here, how does that work? If the nation disobeys God's commands, it should expect divine retribution and ruin. You saw this after 9/11 when Jerry Falwell said that this happened because of the humanists, the gays, the ACLU, right? He got on TV and said this. What happened after Hurricane Katrina? You had megachurch pastors saying the same thing. What happened during the AIDS crisis, right? So this idea of retribution, this idea that if you don't obey God, God will punish you as a nation. Well, that's how Christian nationalists think things work. And that is how they think they will restore the country. Well, if we just got back to doing what God wanted, then we wouldn't have all this trouble. We wouldn't have all this strife. We wouldn't have all of this polarization, this violence, and so on. So what they want to do is they want to go backward. You say, well, when was America great? The 1950s. That's the answer, okay? America was great in the 1950s, okay? So in 2016, 70% of white evangelicals told Public Research Religion Institute that they believe the country has changed for the worse since the 1950s. We have to remember that it's not just the Judeo-Christian tradition where the country was founded, but in the social and the moral revolution of the 1960s and 70s. This is Timothy Goglin, executive at Focus on the Family and a former top advisor to George W. Bush. In the 1960s, we had a frontal assault directly on the Beatitudes, on the 10 Commandments, on the whole body of ethics that forms the Judeo-Christian foundation of the United States of America. All right. So let's just talk real quick. I don't have to tell this group about the 60s, okay? But hey, in the 1960s, we have a couple things happen, okay? I don't know, a Civil Rights Act, immigration reform, a Voting Rights Act, 1963, the feminine mystique, right? 1967, the Loving case makes interracial marriage in all 50 states something that is like protected, okay? We have Stonewall. We have so many events leading to, right, representation, leading to rights and equality for so many more Americans than before, right? Now, were the 60s all good? No, and we can talk about that over lunch. Is a lot of that work unfinished? Of course. Here's my point, and I'll move on to the next slide. If you tell me that the 1950s were the time when this country was great, I'm going to say, so you're telling me before we ended Jim Crow, before we had a Voting Rights Act that makes sure that there was no poll tax, right? And no means of preventing people from voting across the country. Before we had immigration reform, okay? Before, I don't know, no-fault divorce, right? Before, so many of the movements that fought for equal pay, still fighting for equal pay for women in the workplace, right? For protections for LGBTQ people and so on. If you're telling me that you want to go to the America before all that, then you're telling on yourself, if you ask me, right? You're telling me about how you view the country and so many of us in the country, so many of us who are people of color, LGBTQ folks, multiracial, and so on and so forth. All right. This is Mike Johnson, and I'm not sure the video is going to work. And I know that it might be hard for people on Zoom. So it'll show up here in a second. But I'm going to summarize this video for you. And if you want the link later, just because you enjoy watching terrible things or something, just I'll send you the link. Okay. So here's Mike Johnson, our new speaker. I'm going to come back to him later. He says in church a couple of years ago, hey, why do we have school shootings in this country? Well, abortion, the teaching of evolution, the sexual revolution, and so on and so forth, right? This is a classic Christian nationalist trope. The 1960s ruined the country. If we could go back to the 1950s to a social order, okay, that looks like the 1950s, then we'd have something that looked like a great country. But as it stands, when something terrible happens, like it did in Lewiston, Maine, about 14 days ago, the answer is going to be, well, if we'd stop teaching evolution, we might not have these things happen anymore, okay? All right, I'll send anyone that link that wants it. You can listen to it on my podcast if you like, but you're better off not hearing it unless you want to get really angry, or, you know, unless you want higher blood pressure. Maybe some of you do, I don't know, but all right, let's see if we can get to the next slide quickly. No, he's going to talk. No, don't talk. Here, I promised these good folks I wouldn't subject them to this. Here we go. All right. So in response to this, since the 60s, conservative Christians have deputized themselves as the guardians of the traditional family and its patriarchal structure. They envision a familial unit in which the husband, father is the head of the household and the breadwinner, the wife is submissive, the children are obedient, and dad is the voice of God. This then means that the entire country should look like that household, right? That household is the model for the country. You know, when folks are always talking about family values and the nuclear family, to me, that's always a dog whistle. It's always a code word, okay? As somebody who was on the inside for a long time, what they're saying is, hey, here's how your household should look. There should be a dad and a mom, and you should have kids. Otherwise, something's wrong, right? This is how they think, okay? Those kids should think of their dad as the voice of God, and if he needs to punish them through corporal punishment or whatever, so be it. Wife should be submissive, and father should be the patriarchal head. And guess what? We're not going to limit that to our households. That's how society should work. So if you have a gay household, if you have a lesbian relationship, if you have a situation where there's not a patriarchal structure in your household, if you are unmarried, if you are without children, you're just not doing it right and according to God's vision, not only for your household, but for society and for the church, okay? This is a microcosm of how things should look. And Mike Johnson, who I'm going to talk about in a minute, is a pretty good example of that. So the final defining trait is apocalypticism, okay? And I talk about this a lot in my talks, but I think it's really important. White Christian nationalists are really good at talking about the country is in crisis, and if we don't act now, it will all be gone in an instant, okay? Now, I admit, we got a lot of challenges next week talking about climate restoration. Yeah, I laid awake last night thinking about my little kids and the climate. I'm not going to lie to you. I understand a sense of needing to address, right, certain crises. But the crises that you hear from this group are that, you know, unless patriots and good people of faith stand up, then the godless communists like Joe Biden will take over the country. You know, I study these things. I know a lot of you have done your reading. I don't think of Marxism as going from Karl Marx to Trotsky to Lenin to Joe Biden, just not how I do the lineage. Joe Biden doesn't usually fit that group very well. If you look at his voting record and his track record in the Senate, it just doesn't good. But it doesn't matter, because to this group, if you don't fall in line with the structure I just talked about, okay, if you don't see the countries needing to return to the 1950s and that social structure, then you're just a bad American who's a communist. And the communist is the bogeyman for the worst kind of evil, right? Okay. So Mike Pence is going to say you won't be safe in Joe Biden's America. You're going to hear all the time about socialists and communists. And what is communist code for? It's code for a lot of things. You know, one of the things it's code for? Godless, right? Okay. The idea is always going to be, if the country was founded by God and there are godless people amongst us, then there's no way they can be trusted to do good things, but they can't even be moral, right? That's the idea. So when they say communist, they mean you, okay? I'm not, right? And some of you might be thinking, well, I'm a communist. Well, that's great, okay? But some of you may not be. And what I'm telling you is, as a humanist, as an atheist, when they say communist, they mean you, okay? This is the apocalyptic tone. Now, I think I'll come back to this, but apocalypticism does something that is really important, right? As a scholar of religion, I always want to ask, what do things do for people? I can ask what they believe. Oh, do you believe that, in Jesus and this stuff? That's great. I always tell my students, I want to know what this does for you. Here's what it does. If on Fox News, if from the Republican debate stage, if from the Reawaken America tour to the Donald Trump rally, if all you hear all the time from your pastor, from the radio, from the politicians, from everyone in your life, that this country is on the precipice of precipitous ruin, if you hear that all day, every day, if the fear is ratcheted up, Greg Gutfeld is on Fox. Anyone know who Greg Gutfeld is? He's on Fox every day. He's a sort of talking head, okay, on Fox News every day. And he said about 10 days ago, I highlighted this on my show. He said, you know what? Elections don't work anymore. We need war, right? This was on primetime television in the United States with millions of people watching. You know what he said? He said, the cities are so bad, okay? The school system's so broken, the border so open, elections don't work. We need another civil war. And even the people that were with him on the stage in Fox News were like, maybe we should do elections. And he doubled down and said, elections don't work. You know what that does for you? If you live in a world where the only voices you hear are giving you that message, you're willing to take extreme measures. You're willing to do things that you would not normally do. I'll give you one example I use often when I talk. I have two kids. One is 2, one is 6 weeks old. I haven't slept in a long time, okay? I drink a lot of coffee. But just today, before I came here, my wife and my mother-in-law were getting those kids ready to go out somewhere while I was here, right? And I was helping them. And to take those 2 kids to the park, it's a good 58 minutes to get outside the house, right? Diapers, more diapers, milk, change of clothes, another change of clothes, right? A stroller, towels, burp cloth, whatever you need. Takes forever. And then you look down and you're like, oh, I'm still wearing pajamas. I can't wear this to the park. Guess I'll go change too. Okay. It takes so long to do it right. Because if you don't do it right, what happens? You get to the park and one of the kids throws up somewhere and then the other one does something and there's no extra diapers and there's no extra clothes and there's no water and there's no milk and you're just a mess. Everything's gone downhill real quick. You got to do it right. You got to think ahead. You got to really plan and you got to make sure you're committed to it. Guess what? If there's an earthquake, we're in California, right? There's an earthquake. I'm not doing any of that. I'm going to grab one of those babies. My wife's going to grab the other one and we're going to get to safety. We're going to run out of the house. We're going to get under the table, whatever. You know why? Because when crisis happens, you don't do it right. You don't think about the future. You don't stick to a procedure. You don't follow the norms. You don't do it how it's supposed to be done. So if they can convince 40 million Americans that we are in the last minute of America and they better save it by, I don't know, storming the Capitol or calling for civil war, then they can convince them not to do it right. Who needs to follow procedure? Who needs to do things according to the practices and norms set out in in democracy or in a secular government? Okay. All right, let's get to some statistics. Then I promised you that I would talk about the new speaker. 9% of Americans want only Christians to be citizens. This is my friend, a sociologist named Paul Jupe. Paul is at the University of Denison University, I should say. 14% think that their church should have a veto on the government's laws. So whenever I post stuff like this or sit on my show, I'll have someone email me and be like, it's only 10%, who cares? And I'm like, are you serious? If we lined up 10 Americans, I'm not talking from Silicon Valley, I'm talking 10 Americans, one from Silicon Valley, right? One from Omaha, another from Baton Rouge, another from Topeka, another from somewhere in the Dakotas. 1 out of 10 would say you don't get to be a citizen unless you're a Christian. How many others are like, yeah, I'm not going to say it out loud, but I kind of think it. That scares the hell out of me. I don't know about you. 14% think every time the Supreme Court makes a decision, they should have to call the church and be like, hey, are you good? Okay. No? Yes or no? Okay. You're the final check. Think about that way of thinking, right? Now, you might be thinking, well, all right, those are statistics. How does that look in real life? Well, let's talk about our new speaker. Sorry. One more statistics just to get your blood boiling. So feel what they tell you is true, right? This is top answers among Trump voters. So, hey, if you voted for Trump, when these people talk, are they telling you the truth, right? Okay. 71% Trump, 63% friends and family, 56% Greg Gutfield on Fox News saying, let's have civil war, 42% religious leaders. Those are some crazy numbers. Those are really startling numbers about where truth comes from and how folks think about the story of this country and who gets to tell that story about our past, about our future, and about our present. Okay. All right. Here's our new speaker, Mike Johnson. Okay. Let's stop for a minute. For those of you in the room, what do we know about Mike Johnson? I know you all read, you all are up on the news. You know this is bad. Come on, someone tell me one thing you know already. Most of us had never heard of this guy, right? 2 weeks ago. Is that fair? Right? This guy's a no-name backbench congressional person, right? He's a mild-mannered, methodical constitutional lawyer. This is not Lauren Boebert, okay? Getting in trouble at a Beetlejuice show, okay? This is not Marjorie Taylor Greene doing whatever she does, right? Okay, this is not Matt Gaetz. This is not, right? This is not Jim Jordan. This is not the people we see all the time, is it? This is somebody that most of you had never seen a picture of until 2 weeks ago. All right. Since then, you've read a bunch of op-eds and listened to some news, and it scared the bejesus out of you. So somebody tell me one thing you learned. What do you got?
Racist and homophobic.
Okay. Racist and homophobic. A good start. Yeah, a really good start. All right.
He likes guns.
He likes guns. Okay. So not going to do anything to curb gun violence or regulate that in any way. Yes. That's exactly right. So the answer was read the Bible to work out what you should do. So he was asked, what's your worldview? And he said, well, just go read the Bible. Right. That's what he told one interviewer. Yes. One more. Doesn't have a bank account, which this is a whole thing that came out this week. So he does not have a bank account. Now, I think there's two possibilities. Two possibilities for this, just as somebody who's been inside these groups. One, I think this is super fishy, and just like Brett Kavanaugh, he's hiding money, and it's a whole thing. That's a possibility. I think that. I know we're being recorded. I said possibility. Okay, not reporting that. I also know many Christians, like Mike Johnson, who don't trust the banks, and they think that debt is a sin. So there's a really good chance that he only pays for things in cash, and that all his money is under the mattress. And I'm being dead serious about it. So anyway, either way, a little bit weird. No bank account. Okay, let's do one or two more and then we'll move. Yes. Anti-abortion to the hilt, right? A near abortion abolitionist. Okay, a near abortion abolitionist. Yes. Okay, now we're really getting there, right? So the answer was, Bob says, tried to change the election results. So it was one of the people at the spearhead of the congressional strategies to overturn the 2020 election, right? He talked about Georgia being rigged. He was part of the group that was trying to architect all of the schemes, the fake electors and the non-certification on J6 by Pence and so on. Mike Johnson was right in there in the middle of it, albeit behind the scenes, okay? As somebody who studies these things, I can tell you that Mike Johnson is connected to something called the New Apostolic Reformation. And the New Apostolic Reformation, I won't talk for 45 minutes about it today, but that is a movement in the United States that is really a independent charismatic movement. And you're thinking, what does that mean? Okay. What it means is this: they don't have denominations. So some of you grew up Christian, probably, right? Catholic, Methodist, Presbyterian. Okay. These groups, they don't follow denominations. They're not going to say, hey, I'm a Baptist, right? So they're independent in that sense. And then they're charismatic. Charismatic, right? Some of you might be familiar with, right? Speak in tongues. You know, you go to church, they're standing up in the aisles. There's a lot of movement happening, screaming happening, you know, that kind of business, right? The reason they're called the New Apostolic Reformation is they believe that certain people have legitimacy and authority because they're the apostles of our time. So instead of relying on like the Methodist bureaucracy or the Catholic hierarchy, right? They think that, right, Carl and Bob, right, and Judy are the apostles of our time, meaning they talk directly to God. God gives them information. There's apostles and prophets, and those are the people who have the authority, not the denomination, not the central office of the Presbyterians, right? Not Rome and the Vatican. They look to this small group of apostles, okay, and prophets to tell them who is actually, right? What is actually what God wants in the world, okay? And you're like, well, that sounds a little bit fringe. Why do we even need to pay attention to them? Because they're the fastest growing Christian group in the country, okay? There are tens of millions of people who are part of the New Apostolic Reformation. And I've done a lot of work on this. I've written a lot of op-eds and done a lot on my podcast. I've written a whole bunch of stuff on this with a colleague. And what I can tell you is, right, and if you're interested in the New Apostolic Reformation, please ask me later and I'll give you all the resources to learn more about it. I did an 8-hour series on this. So if you have long car rides or you like to walk your dog at night and you want me in your ear for 8 hours talking about it, I'll give you the link, okay? I wrote an op-ed about it. We're hoping to publish another one this week in a big legacy publication. The New Apostolic Reformation was at the center of Christian Trumpism and mobilizing people to be at January 6th, okay? I can't go into, I mean, I could do 4 hours on this, right? I'm not going to, but I'll tell you right now, they were the center of getting people at January 6th to riot in God's name, right? Now, again, I don't think my video is going to work because of technical stuff. So here's my colleague. This is my podcast and my colleague, Matt Taylor, who's maybe the world's foremost expert on the New Apostolic Reformation. But what Matt Taylor will tell you is that the New Apostolic Reformation, you know how they talk about their role on earth? Here's what they will say, okay? They will say, we are here to colonize the earth for God. They literally use the words as, we are colonizers, holy colonizers, okay? And the goal is to take over or to have dominion over every aspect of American society, okay? So this brings me to something that I found this week, along with my colleague who's on this video, that is quite distressing to me. This is a picture of Mike Johnson's office in Congress, right? So I have a friend who works on the Hill for a congressional, I have a friend who works for a Democratic Congress member. So they went over, I said, hey, can you walk by Mike Johnson's office and take a picture for me? Because I have a feeling something's there that's really scary. And so they had an armed guard out there, but they walked by and kind of did one of these with their phone, right? And here it is. So the flag on the left is the Louisiana flag, okay? The flag on the right is called the Appeal to Heaven flag, okay? Has anybody ever heard of the Appeal to Heaven flag? All right, let's talk about the Appeal to Heaven flag. All right, to understand the contemporary meaning of the Appeal to Heaven flag, we have to talk about the Apostolic Reformation, okay? The New Apostolic Reformation has an aggressive theological vision, okay? Many New Apostolic leaders are active in right-wing political circles, okay? Now, the one I want to talk about today is a man named Dutch Sheets. It's a great name, okay? My wife doesn't do this stuff, and I often tell her at night, you know, what I'm up to, and I'm studying a man named Dutch Sheets, and she just looks at me like, okay, what kind of name is that? Dutch Sheets has written more than 18 books. He sold more than 1 million copies, okay? He was an endorser and faith advisor to Newt Gingrich's candidacy for president in 2012, and he openly espoused the lie that Barack Obama was secretly a Muslim during that time. Now, in 2013, Sheets was given this flag, the Appeal to Heaven flag. The Appeal to Heaven flag is actually part of American history, okay? And here's what Sheets talks about. He says, it was this flag that had flown over our nation at its birthing. And he describes this experience, this revelatory experience when he got this flag, as a symbol of what? Spiritual warfare driven by Christian nationalist revolution. That's what he wants, okay? So he has a book called An Appeal to Heaven, okay? And he has a systematic campaign to propagate this symbol in right-wing Christian circles. Sarah Palin, no less, wrote a whole opinion piece in Breitbart about the Appeal to Heaven flag. This was in 2015, and she thanked Pastor Dutch Sheets at that time, okay? Now, as I said, Sheets and his fellow New Apostolic Reformation leaders were the tip of the spear of Christian Trumpism, endorsing Donald Trump's candidacy early on and championing his cause to their fellow Christians. Over the course of the 2016 campaign, the Appeal to Heaven flag and its vision of a Christianity-dominated America became entwined with Donald Trump, a potent, though convert, symbol. So since that time, since that very first year of Donald Trump's candidacy, you see these flags popping up all over the place. And they're usually with far-right politicians and election deniers. So one of them is Doug Mastriano, anyone remember, right? Candidate for governor in Pennsylvania, who lost, okay? You have a lot of right-wing rallies. It flew over the Illinois state capitol for a time, even though there was a big problem with that, and so on. Okay. We made a series, as I said, and have argued as scholars, and we've published this and so on, that the New Apostolic Reformation and Dutch Sheets were the molten core of Christian mobilization for January 6th. Dutch Sheets was integral to this effort, propelling the appeal to heaven narrative alongside the Stop the Steal narrative through his popular podcasts, his books, all of his sermons, and so on. Now, if you look closely, let's see if we can get my slide up here. Here we go. It's going to come in a minute. If you look closely at the images from January 6th, you will see the appeal to heaven flag everywhere. So in the top left, it's a little blurry. You see the white flag here with the green? That's the appeal to heaven flag, okay? Up on the top right, Jesus 2020, what do you see up there to the left? Appeal to heaven flag. Bottom right, American flag, Trump flag, appeal to heaven flag, right? Bottom left, you see all the Trump and American flags? What is right there in the center? Appeal to heaven. Yeah, so the tree, excuse me, the tree is a pine tree. And I didn't talk about this, and I'm happy to talk more about it later. This was an original, this flag was originally used by George Washington, right? And the appeal to heaven came from the writings of John Locke, right? Some of you are familiar with John Locke. And the idea is in the American Revolution, we don't have a king, we don't have a royalty, we have an appeal to heaven for our rights. So in some sense, you can see, right, this sort of appeal to heaven was an appeal that went beyond a kind of royal family, right? That is why they co-opted it. They co-opted it because the appeal to heaven is now, the United States depends on an appeal to heaven. Does not depend on things like elections or democratic norms or principles. It does not depend on free and fair voting, right? It depends on an appeal to heaven and making sure that the United States looks like everything I talked about earlier, that 1950s patriarchal structure, no abortion, no LGBTQ folks, right? On and on and on and on and on and on, okay? So you look closely at all these videos, and there are more, you can see that there are appeal to heaven flags everywhere. We would argue, Matt Taylor and I, no single Christian leader contributed more to the effort to mobilize Christians against the very structures of American democracy than Dutch Sheets. That if democracy isn't working, overthrow it, appeal to heaven, and put in place the God-ordained order. That's what I'm saying, okay? Here is what we reported. We wrote this last year. No one else had broke this news. No other, the Washington Post, New York Times, nobody knew about this, and we wrote it up, and I have to give credit. Matt Taylor, my co-author, is the one who discovered this. On December 29, 2020, 8 days before the insurrection, Dutch Sheets, this man I'm talking about, and his team of prophets were in Washington, D.C., staying at the Willard Hotel. Now, that's the site of the war room. I don't know if you all remember this, but this is where during that time, Steve Bannon and Rudy Giuliani were all holed up trying to overturn the election, essentially, right? So they were there too, Dutch Sheets, and you're like, well, same hotel, big deal. All right, they talked over the breakfast buffet. That's not damning. On that day, however, December 29, 2020, Sheets and 14 other of his apostle and prophet cohorts had a multi-hour meeting inside the White House with Trump administration officials. Now, we don't know who they spoke to because the Trump administration made the White House visitor log secret, and it doesn't matter if you submit a FOIA request, they won't tell you who it was, okay? But members of Sheets' team posted photos of themselves with White House visitor passes both outside and inside the building. They boasted that they had been doing high-level strategy and that there were big things to come. This is a week before the insurrection. Through it all, how did they frame all of those things? A week before the insurrection, the strategy, everything as an appeal to heaven. They put it forth as an appeal to heaven. That was the symbol. Now you're saying, all right, great. Is there any connection of Mike Johnson to Dutch Sheets? And the answer is yes. Shreveport, Louisiana, which is part of, it's right in the heart of Johnson's district, is a place called Shreveport Christian Center. It's a New Apostolic Reformation church. The leader of that church is a man named Timothy Carcaden. Carcaden is somebody who is part of Dutch Sheets' inner circle, They work together. Dutch Sheets has come and spoken at that church many times. In fact, one of Dutch Sheets' closest sort of advisors had a dream. This is how this world works often, a prophetic dream, right? That they were going to somehow strategically overcome the mountain of American politics. And who was included in that dream? Dutch Sheets and Timothy Garkidon. Well, guess who goes to Shreveport Christian Center quite often? Guess who's given sermons there? Guess who's quite close to Timothy Garkidon and even had him come to his swearing in as part of Congress? Mike Johnson. So when Mike Johnson flies that flag outside of his office, he's flying a flag of insurrection. He's flying a flag of overthrowing American democracy in order to appeal to heaven. Okay? So it is worse than you thought. Even all of you who've read all the op-eds and learned all the things about him, it is worse than you thought. Let me get to one more slide, and then I'll answer your question, sir. Okay? I get asked all the time, and I'm going to wrap up. Okay, I know there's probably questions, and some of you are like, "That was bad news. I want some pizza." Okay. I get asked all the time, "What should we do about it?" You know that these things are bad, right? If you want to know my story, and if you want to know sort of a deeper dive into everything I've talked about today, it's all right. It's all in the book. It's a lot. There's a lot more there than I could talk about today. I'm happy to talk about this during questions and over lunch, but I think there's 3 levels of how we can think about our strategies for combating Christian nationalism in our country today. I think 1 is in interpersonal relationships. I think 2 is in civic participation, and I think 3 is in good storytelling. I'll be very brief. I think when it comes to interpersonal relationships, it is very tempting when we talk to our friends, our cousins, our nephews, our neighbors who have gone down some form of this rabbit hole. QAnon, conspiracy, whatever may be, to, as a good humanist and a good atheist, to put on your very rational, data-driven, evidentiary hat and say, "This is why you're absolutely wrong, John. And I can't believe you're so stupid to believe this. It's really disappointing." Has anyone ever done that? You don't have to raise your hand. It's okay. I'll raise mine. I have done that, right? I have lost my temper with people I care about because I could not believe in 2016 or 2019 that they were going down this road. And I'm going to say something, and I'll leave it for discussion later, that is really hard, I think, for humanists and atheists to do. And some of you are not going to like it, and that's totally fine. I think that when you have those conversations, the emphasis needs to be on emotion. And you're like, come on, no. And here's what I mean by that. They have been told by the world they live in that you are a God hater, a United States hater, that you are demon possessed, that you are working for the deep state, that you smell like sulfur because Satan hasn't inhabited your body, and so on. If when they start talking about all this stuff, you stop and say, "Here's where you're absolutely wrong, and I'm actually dumber for hearing you say that." So, right? What's going to happen? You all know from experience. Conversation is probably over. Am I right? It's over. And you're going to walk away, they're going to walk away, and you probably won't talk for 2 years. Thanksgiving is going to be really awkward. It's not good. If you feel like you have the strength and you have the capacity, the next response to all the things they said can be a leading question. It sounds like you're really angry. Like, tell me about it. What are you angry about? Sounds like you're really scared. What are you scared of? It sounds like you're really hurt, like something hurt you and you're resentful. Tell me about your resentment. Tell me about it. I want to know about it. And when they start telling you about their anger and their fear, you might actually turn into a human. Not that liberal, God-hating, anti-America, communist, sulfur-smelling, demon-possessed, whatever they've been told you are. You might just turn into John or Bob or Jennifer or whoever else that they know as their aunt or their friend or their neighbor or their colleague. And then, you know what might happen? Maybe, it's not guaranteed, they might let you talk about what you're scared of. Right? All of a sudden I can say, yeah, you know what? I got a little 6-week-old and a 2-year-old, and I'm scared. I'm scared. Like, we got wildfires and we have floods, and I don't know what's happening with the climate, and I don't know what to do. I am scared. Right? And if that happens, you might turn into 2 people sharing aspects of your humanity. where there's a space opened up where they might say, hey, I had a good talk with John today. I really appreciated that. And you may walk away and think, I didn't convince them that they were wrong, that they're an idiot for listening to that Fox News or Breitbart or whoever they're talking to, or that online pastor or that online podcaster on YouTube that, is radicalizing them. But there might be an opportunity for another chance, right? And when they are able to be the least bit vulnerable and the least bit trusting with you, then every time they hear about the God-hating liberal communists and so on, they might think back to Carl or Bob or Jennifer and think, actually, I have a friend, and we don't agree on this stuff, but we have really good talks about it. And I actually don't think that's true about them. And as somebody who's part of this movement, I can tell you that contact with others outside the bubble, who you feel are human and are not demonic, it goes a long, long way. But you have to commit to it. Because I know, I know I've been in these rooms. I'm a professor. You know what I like to be? Right. I like to be right. I like it when I walk away thinking, I won the argument. I have more data. I have more evidence. I have done more homework. You lose, I win. That's what I want. And I have had to train myself to think differently if I want a different result with the people I care about. Civic participation. Preaching to the choir. So many of you do so many things. But there are places maybe outside of your district, maybe outside of Sunnyvale or Palo Alto or Mountain View, where you might get involved. And you're thinking, well, how does that make sense? I don't live in those places. You heard about Moms for Liberty? Anyone heard Moms for Liberty taking over hundreds and hundreds of school boards across the country? If you look at Moms for Liberty, it is a traveling carousel of people. They go from Livermore to Dublin to Tracy, and the same 10 people show up at every school board, and they agitate and agitate, and they get books banned and books banned until they win. That's their goal. And so you might think, hey, Sunnyvale or Palo Alto, what am I going to do there? Okay. And I would say, here's my response. What is one issue you care about that you can get involved in? And it might take you beyond your comfort zone of what you do already. I'll leave that there because we're running out of time. And I'll say good storytelling. A lot of times as atheists or humanists, we don't like to think about this because storytelling sounds like something coded as a religion. You're going to tell stories? That's religious. Don't do that. That's what religious people do. And I would say this. Some of you are going to like this. Some of you won't. When I talk to the 24-year-old or the 31-year-old about what I want to see happen in this country, if I don't give them a vision of the past and the future, how do I get them into my movement? I'm not talking about telling myths or lies. I'm saying, in the past, so-and-so fought for this, right? Here are the people in the past who stood up and said, we are a secular government. We will have equal rights. We can talk about everyone, right? From Harvey Milk to Martin Luther King Jr. I mean, whoever you want to point to in the past as somebody who said, enough. The America that we want is this one. Could be 50, 60, 70 years ago. It could be 5 years ago. And then say, here's what we want, right? We want a democracy that looks like this. We want a public square where this happens. If we can't tell a story about the past and the future, we'll never win the present, ever. And that may not be, you may be thinking, I like arguments. I like data. I like it when somebody gives me evidence and then I decide whether it's reasonable or not. And I get it, okay? I get it. I totally get it. But I would one thesis I'll put out there is, without good storytelling, we may not have a good public square, okay? Thank you. And I know hopefully we'll have time for some questions, comments.
Thank you, Brad. Any questions or comments? Yeah, Jerry.
Yeah, I don't understand the phrase appeal to heaven, because what that means to me is you're asking for heaven for help. Well, if you're asking heaven for help, why don't you just wait and let them do it?
Yeah, it's a good question. So the question is if you're appealing to heaven, right, why don't you just wait and let heaven do that? Oh, I apologize. Yes. All right. So the question is, why not wait for heaven to do that? Now, this is a question, believe it or not, many other Christians have with these kinds of folks too, right? When I talk to Christians who are not Christian nationalists, when I talk to Jews, when I talk to Muslims, right? They will say something like this. If you believe God and God is actually big and powerful, why do you need to get out here and fight a war for God? Shouldn't God, have everything handled? These folks, Mike Johnson and the New Apostolic Reformation, they think about it this way. There is an unfolding, undecided spiritual war going on in the world. There are demonic spirits, there are demonic strongholds, there are anti-God forces at play. So don't miss this, right? And I'll just answer the question this way, okay? If you have an emphasis on spiritual warfare, if you think spiritual warfare is one of the prime ideas and elements of your religion, you are very close, one step from thinking spiritual warfare to actual warfare, because you're thinking there's an unfolding conflict that's not yet decided. So I need to get involved any way possible. So we're appealing to heaven, and because we're part of that battle, we're soldiers in that war, and here's the other scary part, we're appealing to heaven because that's where our rights come from, right? Your right, and Mike Johnson said this, I can send you all the clips. Your rights come from God. And as humanists, as atheists, as others, we might remind you, hey, a lot of people have said that in the past. There was like some European wars of religion, and usually the folks who tell you that your rights come from God are the ones that have the power to take all your rights away. And that's why we got rid of that, isn't it? Right? But they're appealing to heaven because they want to say, well, your rights come from God. So you appeal to heaven, not to say what, a constitution? Not to man-made documents? You can see here now, we're one step away from spiritual warfare to actual warfare. And we're one step away from saying, yeah, the Constitution is great, but if it gets in the way, appeal to heaven. That's what's really important.
Okay, Jax, I see you've got your hand up.
Can you hear me?
Yes.
Great. I've been accused of people in my bubble, in the lefty bubble, when I say things like, let's find common ground, let's talk to people, this is the way to change things. And this has happened twice in the last couple days. I've been accused of trying to change things incrementally. And, you know, do we feel like, because I don't know, I've kind of internalized these suggestions of yours, and I'm getting pushback. So do we know that this works? Like, is it, I don't know.
Yeah.
You see where I'm going with that?
I do. Yeah. Great questions.
Thank you.
What I would say is, when I think about common ground, for me, what I want to do is find common ground as human beings who are vulnerable, who are limited. So what do I mean by that? When I was in part of the Christian nationalist circles, the idea was that anyone outside, right, any of you, were really scary, evil people who wanted to try to destroy the world, right? I was scared. I lived in fear of actually encountering somebody outside the bubble, because I was like, they just want to destroy everything. And then I had contact with people outside the bubble, and I realized, hey, you don't believe what I do, but like, you're a human. Like, you showed up when I needed something and helped me out. You were there to kind of like listen for a minute when I needed that. You understood what I was going through, right? So I'll just say briefly, my idea of common ground is not to say like, yeah, let's come to some moderate policy on this or that, where moderation is just not going to work, right? My common ground is, if I'm in an interpersonal relationship, not a civic level. I'm not talking about showing up as a county supervisor or a city council person and finding common ground with extremists. That's not what I'm talking about. What I am talking about is on an interpersonal level, shifting the focus to the common ground of, you're afraid and so am I. You're hopeful and so am I. You desire this, I desire this. You know why? Because we're human, right? Because we have affect and feeling and comportment in the world. So to me, that's where my emphasis on common ground is. It's not so much on, hey, you think women's rights should be taken away. Well, I don't, but you know, let you just, we'll go to like 80% your side and 20% mine, just so we can like actually move forward. I'm not interested in that, but I am interested in, at the barbecue or at Thanksgiving or somewhere else, having that sort of feature of my interpersonal relationships be on the common ground of being a human being.
Okay, Zim.
Hello, Professor. Thanks for the excellent talk. I've always had a question about American religiosity in general, in that this country seems to be too wealthy for that many people to be religious. I think the United States is an outlier. The wealthier a country is, the less religious it is. For instance, a really poor country like Bangladesh is apparently the most religious country in the world, which makes perfect sense, since life on earth clearly has, disappointed you. Whereas apparently America has the same level of religiosity as Lebanon. Why is that? I mean, well, you really are an outlier.
Yeah, this is a really big question. I won't have time to go into it in detail today, but you're exactly right. I'm not a fan. I know we're recording this, so someone will put this on YouTube later and email me. I'm not a fan of American exceptionalism. This is a way that we are exceptional. If you look at our peers, whether it's Denmark, whether it is Finland, whether it is France, we are much, much more religious as a country. I think it is because of the ways that this myth of the Christian nation has been tied into our public square. I know many of you online and many of you here will have been familiar with my colleague and friends Andrew Seidel's book, right? The Myth of a Christian Nation, the founding myth, I should say. That book lays this out in detail. If you can instill that myth in the American population, then you can tie being a good American citizen into being religious. Let me give a counterexample. I spent a lot of time in France earlier in my academic career, and there are still many French Catholics in the world, but to be a good French person does not include being a Christian person, right? And in fact, when you say laicité in France, right, when you say secularism, it's not a slur. It's not a bad word. It is in this country, in many circles, right? When you talk about secular, right, as a politician or somewhere else, you're often using it as a slur because of everything you're saying in this question. Whereas in a place like France, laicité is, right, égalité, fraternité, laicité, it's part of the national identity. And so to be a French person is in fact to be someone who says, of course you can be a good French person, right, without being a Christian person. Well, this country has gone the other way. And so much of the country thinks that if you want to actually be a good American, if you're Nikki Haley and you want to be president, you better get rid of your foreign name and you better convert to Christianity because that's the only way you'll have a chance, right? That's a pretty good example.
Michael, I see your hand up.
Yeah, thank you for your very interesting talk. And you already answered my main question that I had to you on your slide, how to fight back. And this is an excellent answer, and I completely agree with what you said, except the title of this slide. And the problem is that the words have power. And if you're using this word fight even in metaphorical sense, which is obviously the case here, but still our raw emotions are rising like when we are preparing for actual fight. And probably this is not a kind of response that you want to trigger here, right? Maybe a better way to express what you actually said on this slide is how to preserve our democracy, how to preserve or repair our social fabric from these forces tearing us apart. So something along these lines. So that's my only comment.
Yeah, I appreciate that very much. Thank you. Thank you for that feedback. I'll think about that and take that into consideration. That's really helpful. Thank you.
Okay, Jacob.
Okay, I'm a full-time political consultant since 2010, and I talk to Trump people and people from all sides, libertarians, socialists, you name it. And what I find works is to be in a place of learning, not a show-off like I know already and I'm going to teach you or prove something to you, but be in a place of, I want to understand you. Please convince me. Be open to being convinced, to learning, right? Not thinking you already know, and that you already understand, right? And what that does is when they see that you're open, that you're listening, that opens them up to listen to what you have to say and present, so that you're learning together. You're not trying to convince or persuade each other of anything, right? So you're moving together as two human beings, not Republican, Democrat, socialist, libertarian, but as human beings, learning together what is happening. This is the central problem today, is that people are not well informed, right? Each person has their place where they're getting their information from. You get it? We need to find sources of information. That means independent news journalists with a proven track record, right? Not these corporate establishment entities on the boob tube, but full-time independent truth tellers. And we need to listen to them. They're doing the heavy lifting for us. We need to take into what they're saying into consideration. We need to come on common ground. Who are these people that are doing this full-time work for us, that have a proven track record of morality, ethics, right? They stand for the truth. They're willing to die.
Let's give
for
him a
the
chance to
truth,
respond
right?
to this, okay?
So this is the best way, you know, to have a conversation
Yeah. So
and to learn together.
yeah, appreciate that, Jacob. I understand what you're saying. I think we agree on many levels in terms of trying to enter those interpersonal contexts with maybe a different lens than simple, who has the right source and who has the right data. I will disagree with you as somebody who has a lot of contact with folks who are deep down these rabbit holes. When you suggest to them that we will find these independent news sources, they will look at you like, you're part of the problem here, because as the graphic I showed, who do they believe is telling them the truth? Well, 73% of Trump voters think Donald Trump. And then it goes to friends and family, then it goes to their pastor, then it goes to other. So when you at the barbecue tell your Uncle Ron or your nephew Joseph that, hey, you should really stop watching that and watch this thing that I have found, because they are an independent journalist with a track record of morality, that there's a very little chance that that's actually going to happen and that they will pay any attention to that. So anyway, we can talk more about that.
No,
But yeah.
No, but that's not
excuse
the
me.
starting point. The starting point is to learn, find out, meaning apply criteria. In other words, start at the beginning. Like
Most people don't
okay,
want to do that. Yeah,
Excuse
most
me,
people don't
there are
want to
other
do that.
people, there are other questions in the room here. I had one, by the way.
Yeah.
In discussing the Christian
the
worldview,
challenge,
do they
is to
admit
take
that
a
there's such a
person
thing
who
as
doesn't
deists?
is
As
not
deists?
open
As
to
deists,
that.
that deists were involved with the founding of the country.
Yeah, most will not admit that. So the question is, will Christian nationalists admit that there were deists involved in creating the country or founding the country? And the response is that the short answer is no. So what they will tell you is a really flat version of Christian history or American history. The country was founded by Christians with Christian people in mind, and the goal was to protect Christianity, right, from outside forces. So everybody from George Washington to Thomas Jefferson to James Madison to John Adams to Thomas Paine, it does not matter. They have not looked into it, right, and they have not checked the sources and said, well, I actually read all of Thomas Paine's writing. Definitely an evangelical Christian, right? They have not done that. What they have done is they've taken a flatlined American history version from David Barton. Anybody know who David Barton is? So he is the sort of historian par excellence of the Christian right. He has told a story of just linear Christian history. So when you approach them and say, well, actually, Thomas Jefferson had his own Bible. You all know about Thomas Jefferson's Bible, right? There's no miracles in there. Okay. They'll look at you like, nah, that can't be true. Right. Or if you actually talk about James Madison as having a pretty complex relationship with religion, to say the least, or reference someone like Roger Williams, right? The response is often a blank look of, that's not true. I don't believe you. And this is a Christian nation. that is what is true, and that is what I know. So there's very little admittance of any kind of deism or some other form of belief or non-belief in the American founding.
But you're not trying to
But
convince
Human,
anybody. The point is, you like if somebody says whatever, a story, I say, okay, show me. I want to learn. Teach me, right? In other words, get them to go
Yeah, I
through
don't know
the
how to do
process.
that from here. So, yep.
Get them to go through the process of telling you, right?
Okay, go ahead.
Yeah, I like to share a personal experience. My father was an atheist, and he was a history professor, but only very few people within the family knew that he was an atheist. Outside, no. And what I learned from that also, that you have to start from the grassroots level, not at the leadership level, and also involved in not just promoting atheism or anything, but address the needs of that people.
Mhm.
And that's how you kind of get integrated into that system.
Yeah.
And without addressing at the grassroots level their needs and their requirements, it's impossible, because who cares about whether there is a God or not? It doesn't matter. If we can address together all these issues, like I remember a friend of mine who drove through the Midwest, and he said the poverty level is so stark. If you can address those, getting involved, they will start to believe, because everybody believed that my father was a good man. They didn't know that he was an atheist. And in India, you know that the religion is much more pervasive.
Yeah.
But they always respected him, they involved him. And that's how I feel that we need to get involved at the grassroots level, and also address and work with the mass population to address their needs.
Yeah, I know we're running out of time. I'll be very brief. I appreciate your comment very much. I will say that I know there's different groups represented here today. One thing I appreciate about Nick Fish, who's the head of the American Atheists at the moment, is whenever you talk to Nick, this is what he's talking about, right? Nick's very focused, and as well as others in that group, on action, right? What are the policy positions? Who are we fighting for? There's a lot of time for us to have lunch or coffee or beer and discuss, are we humanists? Are you an atheist? Are you, and those are really interesting and important things. But I do appreciate on a civic level, and perhaps on an interpersonal level as well, this focus on who are we fighting for? How can we help? This is kind of what I've maintained on my platform for a long time, is if you actually help people, you might be able to break that cycle of propaganda, right? So if you see that something like unions and Detroit are going to help people earn a living wage, then you might have some power in those local communities, right, that goes beyond the Fox News bubble and actually get people thinking a little bit differently politically. Really quickly, why do churches and right-wing politicians fight so hard to destroy the safety net? Because if they do that, then you rely on that. If you go to rural Louisiana, where do you get food if you don't have enough money? The church, right? Where do you go if you can't make ends meet that time, right? Where do you go if you need childcare? Church, right? This is why there's a long-term big strategy to destroy a social safety net. So you rely on, right, those other existing institutions to meet human needs, and that's all part of the play. So yeah, anyway.
Okay, Jerry, and I think this will probably be the last comment or question.
Well, I'm from Massachusetts. The second settlement in the United States was in the Massachusetts, founded by religious people escaping religious persecution. And then Connecticut was founded people who had different religions and were escaping the persecutions of the Pilgrims. And the same thing was true for Rhode Island.
Rhode
So
Island,
at least three states, you
Yeah.
know, were religious.
So is your point there, Jerry, that this is a Christian nation, or what's the point?
Just that there is a little bit of truth to Christian. I'm not saying the whole country is, but there's a little bit of truth there.
Oh, yeah. So here, if you want to have if you have a friend who says, right, this is really a Christian nation, Massachusetts Bay Colony, right? Roger Williams then leaves and he goes off to Rhode Island and so on. My response as a professor with my students is always this: I'm not telling you there's not Christians in American history. I'm just saying, if this is so important, if this is so important, let's actually do the work. I mean, if we actually care about it, let's look at Massachusetts Bay Colony. Let's look at how we got Rhode Island. Let's look at what Thomas Paine said about religion and James Madison. And let's look at what like, these are our founders, right? All I hear about is the American founding. Y'all are talking about this all the time. Of course there's Christians in American history. Of course there's Christians in the American founding. No one's denying that. I'm just saying, I love a story that's actually attends to the complexity of its characters rather than a flat story, right? That just levels really important historical details into one mantra that this is a Christian nation. So that's how I address that. And that's how I think that it's worth sort of talking about with friends and family is, of course, there's Christians in history. And of course, those are really important parts of the American founding. I'm not denying that. I'm just saying if this story is that important to us, right, then why don't we get it right? Every time I say there's a mass shooting and someone talks about banning AR-15s, people say, well, you don't even know what AR stands for. So no, I'm not listening, right? So my response to that person is, you care so much about the details of a handheld killing machine's name that you won't even talk to me unless I get it right. Why don't we have the same standard when it comes to the American founding and our founding fathers' beliefs about religion? Seems worth it.